Every section in the student data dashboard we have covered so far was based off of individual students, where you were limited and had to select and view data for one student at a time. In this section, Classroom Trends, we are looking at data overall for all of your students, not just one student. So if you want aggregate data or data for your entire class or entire roster, you want to come to the Classroom Trends section. You'll notice the Classroom Trends section has this green bar. You also do not have a student filter. Instead, you have a period filter here on the top. So you could view data specifically by class period, by grade, and of course by your roster of students. Here, on the landing page, you will see classroom demographics, and you're given an overview of demographic information, including ethnicity, SWD, and gender breakdown. Down here on the bottom of the screen, you have a whole roster list of students with every piece of information you could possibly need about your students, including all of the student identifiers, their grade level, if they're SWD, gifted, 504, promotion status, if they're a bus rider on a variance, their ethnicity, ELL status, if they take an alternate assessment, their birth date, if they're a migrant student, ACE, AVID, IB, ROTC, AP participant, all of that information is here and exportable in a table. You also have down here different tabs within Classroom Demographics. So for example, if I click on ESE, it's going to give me a warning here to let me know that I cannot export and print this page. But it's going to give me a list of all of my instructional accommodations and other accommodations for all students in my class. So if I click on common accommodations, I could filter by extended time. And what that will do is give me a list of students who get extended time accommodations. I could do the same thing down here for other accommodations. I also have a tab for PM data. PM data gives me all information on my students and last year's PM score. Here, we can see things such as their silo from the previous school year, their PM 1, 2, and 3 score. And this data is exportable as well. You also have the same option for EOC data here as well. Now remember, you're only going to see data for students currently enrolled to you. My next tab over is the Watermelon Report. The Watermelon Report is specifically based off of PM1 to PM2 data. Now you'll notice it's blank right now because students have not been administered PM1 and PM2. So I can go up here to the top right and change the school year to last year. So at least we can show you something of what this looks like. Here you could see student growth across the x-axis is student growth percentile from PM1 to PM2. On the y-axis is student percentile performance on PM2. So in the top right box, these are all going to be students who had high score and high growth from PM1 to PM2. Whereas the bottom left is going to be students who had low score and low growth from PM1 to PM2. I can click on a student's name on the table and it's going to show me exactly where that student is located. Or I can hover over a dot with my mouse and it's going to give me that entire student progression graph so I can see how that student performed on VBAs and progress monitoring. On the right-hand side, you also have your filters, which you can adjust your data as well. So if I only want to see SWD students, I can click the SWD filter and it will filter all of that data for me. I can switch between ELA and math by clicking on the math button over here on the right, and it will bring me to my math data. My next button is My VBA. And for my VBA, I'm going to go back to the 23-24 school year so we can look at VBA data from this year. From my dropdown, I can see that we've had one VBA test, Science 8th grade VBA 1. It tells me the number of students tested and the percent of students scoring a 3 or above. It also gives me the breakdown by achievement level 1 through 5. On the bottom down here, it gives me the student information, points earned, points possible, score, their scaled score, and the performance level. I also have this button here, Other Assessments. Anything that's not a VBA, such as a DIA, would be displayed here. So for example, here's some civics data. I can see the total number of students tested, the average score, the percent of students scoring a 60 and above, the percent of students scoring a 70 and above, and the percent of students scoring a 90 and above. My next tab moving over to the right is benchmarks. By selecting benchmarks, instead of getting an individual student view, I get the entire class or all of my students here as well. So you'll notice I have the strand, the students tested, the benchmark, the clarifications, the average score, and the percent proficient for that benchmark. If I hover over, it will tell me where that benchmark was assessed. I can view this by all benchmarks, bubble benchmarks, overview, but I also do want to take a moment and show you my strands. On my strands, I can filter by subject or by assessment. So if I only want to see science data, I can filter by science. And you'll notice down here, it gives me an overview of my students and how they're performing on every individual strand. If I click on the Earth and Space Science strand, it's only going to show me Earth and Space Science benchmarks. And it will tell me how many times each benchmark was assessed and the average score on that benchmark. This is really useful to get very quick overview strand data on your students. And of course, everything is filterable over here on the right-hand side. I have silos as my next button over. What this is going to do is provide me my lowest quartile list of students and my math lowest quartile list of students. So here I can see what silo the student is in, how they performed on last year's test, and all of their updated PM1, PM2, and PM3 scores from this school year. I also have the bubble breakdown here as well, meaning I can see how many students are proficient based on last year's test score, how many students are on the bubble, how many students are not proficient, and how many students don't have a prior year score. I could see the list of students here as well. On the top is ELA, and on the bottom is math. Now remember, this data is all based off of last year's test score. So that means last year, 27 students were proficient, meaning they had a high 3, 4, or 5. Bubble means they scored a high 2 or a low 3. Those are those bubble kids that could go either way when it comes to achievement. And not proficient are students who scored a 1 or a low to mid 2 on last year's state assessment. Lastly, you have the reading tier. And again, this is being pulled directly from Focus. And as you update the data in Focus, as your registrar updates that based on your ELA decision trees, this information will be updated as well. but this information is pulled directly from Focus, so you can see their MTSS readings here. You also have access to discipline and attendance data for your students. Now remember, these are not referrals that you necessarily wrote as the classroom teacher, but these are the referrals that your students received. So I could see here on the left-hand side, I could see the types of referrals and how many there are. So this grade level has received 32 school rules violations this year. I can also see the location as to where these referrals occurred. I could see which students have the most referrals. And then over here, I could see the relationship between the percent of days absent. So if I click on a student, I'll be able to see if that student has any referrals to see if there is a relationship between absenteeism and referrals. I can also click on the types of referrals and see of those school rules violations, where they occurred, and who received the referral. And again, your filters still work all on the right-hand side. And lastly, there's third grade portfolios, which we're not going to get in today. Updates will be provided later on for third grade teachers. The biggest thing to remember with Classroom Trends, this is the one section where you can view classroom level data. Every other tab on the navigation bar on the left is for single student view. So if you want to view classroom level data, you need to be in Classroom Trends. And in this section, you can filter by grade level, period, and on most pages, the school year as well. That concludes the section on Classroom Trends. Take a moment and complete your scavenger hunt for this section.